Imagine standing on a public sidewalk, camera in hand, capturing everyday moments when suddenly, a cop approaches with a sharp tone and an attitude to match. What should have been a peaceful act of recording turns into a tense confrontation as the officer questions your right to film. With a mix of authority and ego, he insists you stop, claiming you're causing trouble. The man stays calm, knowing he's within his rights, but the situation escalates quickly. Words are exchanged, tensions rise, and before you know it, the officer decides to detain him right there on the spot. Why was the officer so determined to stop him? Was this a simple misunderstanding or an overreach of authority? This story takes a surprising turn, and you won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned to see how one man's stand for his rights leads to an unforgettable clash. The man, holding his camera steady, tries to explain calmly that he's just filming the street, something completely legal on public property. But the officer doesn't seem interested in listening. "You're acting suspicious," the cop says, his tone firm and unyielding. Nearby pedestrians slow down, glancing nervously at the growing tension. The man stands his ground, pointing out that he hasn't stepped onto private property or disrupted anyone. Still, the officer remains unconvinced, his ego seemingly fueling the standoff. "I'm giving you a lawful order," the officer says, stepping closer. His hand rests on his belt, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of authority. Despite the man's calm demeanor, the officer's persistence only grows. Was the camera capturing something the cop didn't want recorded? Or was this just an overreaction spiraling out of control? The air is thick with tension as the man refuses to back down, knowing the law is on his side. The officer's voice grows louder, drawing more attention from passersby. "I told you to stop recording," he snaps, frustration creeping into his tone. The man, still calm but feeling the pressure, replies, "I'm on a public sidewalk. I have every right to film." His steady response only seems to irritate the officer further. Meanwhile, a small crowd begins to gather, whispering among themselves. Some pull out their phones, quietly recording the interaction. A woman in the crowd mutters, "He's not doing anything wrong." Why is the cop so aggressive? Another man shakes his head. "It's just a camera." What's the big deal? The officer glances at the growing group, his frustration shifting to unease. Yet instead of de-escalating, he doubles down, demanding the man hand over his camera. The man refuses, his voice firm but respectful. "You have no reason to take it." What's the real issue here? Behind the scenes, the situation feels layered. Was this officer simply exercising too much authority, or was there something more he didn't want on film? The tension hangs in the air as the conflict intensifies, leaving everyone watching unsure of what will happen next. The officer's patience seems to snap as he steps closer, his voice low but firm. "If you don't stop filming, you're going to be detained." Do you really want to go down that road? The man feels his pulse quicken, but doesn't waver. "I'm not breaking any laws," he responds, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. The crowd shifts uneasily, some murmuring in quiet support, while others pull out their phones, recording the heated exchange. Suddenly, the officer pulls out his radio, calling for backup. The air grows heavier as the crowd senses the situation spiraling out of control. The man tries again to reason with the cop. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just filming on a public sidewalk. Why are you escalating this?" But his words fall on deaf ears as the officer signals for him to turn around, handcuffs in hand. The onlookers gasp, their voices rising in protest. He's done nothing wrong. One woman shouts. Another man steps forward cautiously, asking, "Officer, isn't recording on public property legal?" But the officer, seemingly determined to assert his authority, ignores the questions. The man's heart pounds as he contemplates his next move. Should he comply and risk losing his camera, or stand his ground and face whatever comes next? The tension reaches its peak as the sound of another patrol car approaching echoes down the street, raising the stakes even higher. As the second patrol car pulls up, two additional officers step out, scanning the scene and the growing crowd. One of them approaches the first officer, clearly trying to assess the situation. "What's going on here?" he asks. The original cop, still gripping the handcuffs, explains he's filming on the sidewalk, refusing to comply. The second officer frowns, glancing at the man with the camera, then at the restless onlookers. "Filming on public property isn't a crime," he says firmly, catching everyone off guard. The crowd murmurs in agreement, but the first officer's expression darkens. "He was being uncooperative," he retorts, but the tension between the two officers is now palpable. The second cop hesitates, as if sensing that there's more to the story. "Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be," he says, stepping closer to de-escalate. But before anyone can breathe a sigh of relief, another twist shakes the scene. A man from the crowd speaks up. "I recognize you," he says, pointing at the first officer. "You pulled something like this before, didn't you?" Gasps ripple through the group as the officer stiffens, his demeanor shifting into defensive mode. Suddenly, the situation is no longer just about the man with the camera. It's about exposing something much bigger. The crowd begins to press for answers, their phones still recording, as the officer's authority starts to crumble under the weight of suspicion. The first officer's jaw tightens as the man from the crowd steps forward, his voice steady but sharp. "Yeah, I remember you. You tried to intimidate me the same way last year, but I wasn't doing anything wrong either." The crowd buzzes with growing energy, their phones capturing every word. The second officer looks at the man with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Is that true?" he asks the first officer, his tone shifting to one of authority. The first officer hesitates, his confidence beginning to crack. "I was doing my job," he mumbles, but his grip on the handcuffs loosens. Sensing the shift, the man with the camera speaks up. "This isn't about me breaking the law. This is about him using intimidation to control people who know their rights." The crowd cheers in agreement, their voices rising in support of the man. The second officer sighs, clearly torn, but eventually nods. "All right," he says, turning to the man with the camera. "You're free to go. You're not doing anything illegal." The crowd erupts in applause, but the tension isn't fully resolved. The first officer glares, his face red with embarrassment, and storms off toward his patrol car without another word. Just as the man begins packing up his camera, a woman from the crowd approaches. "You might want to hold on to that footage," she says quietly. "I've seen him act like this before, and it might be useful one day." The man nods, realizing the story isn't just about him. It's about standing up for everyone who's been silenced by fear. As the second officer waves off the crowd, the man walks away, camera in hand, ready to share what he captured. But deep down, he knows this encounter was just the beginning of something bigger. As the man walked away, the tension slowly dissolved into the afternoon air. The crowd dispersed, but not before offering supportive nods and words of encouragement. His camera felt heavier now, not from its weight, but from the importance of what it had captured. This was more than a confrontation. It was a reminder of the power of accountability. Later that evening, the man reviewed the footage. Every word, every movement told a story far beyond a simple sidewalk recording. He uploaded the video, not out of spite, but to shed light on what many might have faced silently. Comments poured in from people sharing similar experiences, and the story became a rallying point for standing up against unfair treatment. The officer's actions were later reviewed by his department, And though it wasn't the end of the issue, it sparked necessary conversations. For the man, it was proof that standing firm in the face of intimidation could create real change.